And we always used to have a lot of fun. And I'd have the tickets with me, and I'd rip them up for everybody, and we'd each walk away with our 10 or 11 games of the tickets for the season. And that was always a lot of fun to do.
Who could I thank? Is it you, or was it my dad, or maybe somebody else? Whose idea was it after the Knicks won the championship to go, I want to get season tickets, I want to go to these games? Whose idea was it?
Well, I would say, I don't know, maybe more your dad than me, because he was, I think, a little more sports-oriented than I was. Honestly, the Knicks weren't that much on my radar. I think it must have been your dad. I must have been, spoken to by your dad and some other friends, because there were the other guys that we went in with were good friends. One was great friend Joel Epstein, who was a neighbor and a friend. And I really did not, I don't think they were that high on my radar. So I think I was kind of willingly talked into doing it. The first time that I discovered the Knicks, I remember very clearly, it was during the previous year, the championship year, 69-70. There was a lot of buzz about it when we were in high school. At that point, I was 16 years old or so, 15, 16 years old. There was buzz about that because we used to like to play basketball. Your dad and I and tons of our friends. I mean, we had regular pickup games, but regularly scheduled pickup games. And we had some good rivalries, with some of the other kids in our school that lived in a different part of town versus our gang. It was our gang versus the Weiss gang. This guy, Jeff Weiss, that was friends, and he had his own group of kids. But I remember distinctly really getting interested in the Knicks, as so many people did, when they got into the finals versus the Lakers that year. And I remember that the games that were played in New York, to the best of my memory, were blacked out on ABC TV. Those are national broadcast games. And they must have been sold out, but there might have been still some sort of a blackout rule. So I have very distinct memories of dialing my TV. Of course, we're talking about old school TV at that point,
right?
And dialing in Channel 8, which was from Hartford, living in New York, and I think it was the Hartford or New Haven channel. Maybe it was the New Haven channel, Channel 8. And if I was able to dial into Channel 8 and just turn the contrast dial just right, or the reception dial. This was more of a hands-on experience back then with TVs. I was able to get kind of a fuzzy black and white image of the game from the Channel 8 feed.
Wow.
And I remember that was a whole big thing, trying to dial in and see some of those finals games in 1970. And that was a whole effort in itself, just trying to dial in and see as much of those games as possible. And that was great. And we did have some friends in high school that went to some of those games in that playoff. And then, so come the next year, the Knicks were a hot topic, being the world champions. And that's when I spoke to your dad about going in with some of the other guys and sharing tickets. And there were at least 5 of us. So this way, as we said before, it was able to keep prices, a little bit under control for us. And I remember distinctly the first year that we had the tickets in the 70-71 season. I think we were just on the cusp of being able to drive. But I remember more often than not being driven to the Manhasset train station by, either my mom or your dad's mom or dad's dad. We would get driven. We would get a ride to the station. And then we would take the train invariably, to take the Long Island Railroad into Penn Station. We would stop at Little Nick's Pizza, which was there at in Penn Station in these early days, and have our 2-3 slices of pizza each. Is
that place still there, or is that the place that is now next to the Krispy Kreme? It's on the second level.
Yes, exactly. I think the pizza place that's next to Krispy Kreme is the same, is a kind of a reincarnated version of what we went to. I think it's still, I think that has always been a pizza place.
I never knew this was a tradition that dated back to the 70s. Continue. So continue, because I'll tell you what my tradition is with my dad. continue, and I'll tell you what mine is after, because it's very similar so far.
Well, we'll talk. I guess I'll step through the time, because then we'll talk about something that will dovetail to your experience, I'm sure. So this was when we were younger, and basically just going for a couple of cheap slices of pizza before the game was just the thing to do, and it was great. And then as we got older and we were able to drive, there were a number of times that your dad and I would drive in from Long Island, and we would go straight to Little Italy or Chinatown before the game. And this was a great thing that your dad and I did. I mean, we just had so much fun. And as we used to say also, as I mentioned about the Knicks draft, we used to say, well, this dinner we're having right now, this will be the highlight of our evening. As we're off to see Tiki Burden and the Knicks or whatever after that. And we would go down to Little Italy and have dinner, or Chinatown, Puglia's restaurants. I remember we had a lot of fun. Then we drive up and get a parking spot on the street and then go to the game. And then as we got older, we discovered this great bar called Tirnanog. At the time it was on 8th Avenue.
Is it still there?
Tirnanog has moved. They ended up closing down. It's one of those realty things where they were as part of an office building. But they did relocate, to a completely different building, a different establishment, just a block or two south of the Garden, because your mom and I had dinner there, I think last year or the year before last. We ate dinner there before the game. So Tirnanog, Tirnanog, a great pub, a great place to go before the game. So your dad and I used to go there, when they were still on 8th Avenue, and we get our free-range chicken dinners, which we both loved, and have a drink. And it was a great time. It was always such a great social experience to get together and go to the game, go to dinner, and then go to the game. And we had a lot of fun doing that. But Tirnanog still now exists, just, I think, 31st or 32nd Street, just south of the Garden. Great place to go to before a game.
Now, I want to paint a picture. What are you guys wearing? Because this is the 70s, 80s, New York City. The fashion was just so hot back then. I'm like picturing you guys dressed as like Ad Rock or Adam Yauch for the Beastie Boys. You know what I mean? Like, what are you guys wearing?
Well, if you're talking about us in the 70s when we were teenagers, then into our early 20s, I think pretty much you can count on the fact that we were wearing jeans. And, well, depending upon what the weather was like, the fall goes into the winter, into the spring, just the casually dressed jeans, and probably always sneakers.
What kind of sneakers, do you know?
I know I had Adidas sneakers for quite a while with the stripes.
Yeah.
I imagine they still have the same style now. But it was mainly Adidas sneakers, I recall. White Adidas sneakers, blue jeans, and whatever shirt and or sweater was appropriate to the weather, but right. Casual, and a zip-up jacket.
Yeah, I'm just trying to paint that picture. And so let me tell you it's so funny that you're telling me what you guys used to do before games. For me, my dad, and we had the same tradition every single game. We take the LIR, we take the train into the city. From Long Island, we take the train into the city. And we would stop and we'd get pizza at that same pizza place. And then after the pizza, we'd go, and it's so funny to get to our seats. So I'll ask you this in a second. The seats must have changed over time, because growing up, our seats were then fourth row in the corner. Like fourth row from the court all the way in the corner. So to get to our seats, you had to go through a tunnel. You can't do this now since they renovated the Garden. But you'd go through like a tunnel, and it's amazing I'm not fat, because we would then get a pretzel on the way to our seats. So even after eating pizza and soda...
Your carbo loading there for that.
We get a pretzel. God, it's so unhealthy. Get a pretzel with mustard and another soda. And we'd get to our seats, and we would walk onto the court, and then I think I explained this in my last podcast. Walk onto the court. It didn't have to, but we would walk on the baseline like one or two steps, and then we'd go to our seats. And it's just so funny because that's pretty much the same tradition you guys had. Now, when did the seats change? The season tickets must have changed at some point from the upper deck down to that fourth row in the corner.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of a whole storyline unto itself. As I mentioned, when we first started, we were in section 331 with the fairly affordable green seats. We held those, I'm going to say, for maybe 10 years at least, I think. And then as we got older and we had a little more money, we were working. So let's say now we're into 1980 or into the early 80s. I reached out to whoever was involved in the tickets, along with your dad and myself, and we discussed, gee, why don't we see about moving down from these seats, see if we can get something lower.
As I'm assuming you guys are now older and have jobs and maybe more money to spend.
Right, exactly. And of course the green seats were continuing to build up in expense, but we thought, hey, maybe let's just see what's available. So I remember reaching out either by phone or whatever to the Knicks ticket office, and they said, well, if you want to put yourself on a list for a ticket upgrade, we'll contact you prior to the following season and, let you know what your options are. And so lo and behold, come the next season or during the off season, I got a call or a correspondence offering us to move down to, at that time, the seventh row in the corner of the courtside seats, on the floor. And the seats were not astronomically expensive at that time, obviously more expensive than where we were in the green seats. But we talked about it amongst ourselves and decided that this would be a cool thing to do after all these years.
How much were those seats? This is now we're in the 80s, so how much were these seats?
I honestly don't recall. I don't recall if they were $40 or $50, but it was a jump certainly from the tickets that we had. But I guess we felt that we could financially pull it off, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I'll go on into a little more specifics about pricing. So we had those seats in the seventh row for a couple of years, and then we got a little greedy. It's like, well, I wonder if we can move up even a little closer in the seventh row. Seventh row was nothing to sneeze at. And again, reached out the garden, and we were able to leapfrog up to the fourth row, which is the row that you were referring to.
Right. And what year was that you got to leapfrog up to the fourth row?
That had to be 20 years ago. So I don't know, maybe. Well, I'll tell you what. Well, actually, because now it is hard to remember back to when I was in the seventh row versus the fourth row, because I remember being in one of those rows. Just to do an aside, and then I'll get back to the tickets, which I want to follow up on.
Okay.
But I remember being in either the fourth row or the seventh row during the 1994 finals,
right,
and particularly the OJ game we were at, which was I think Game 5 or Game 4 of the finals. So either Game 4 or Game 5 of the 1994 finals, because we were sitting there, your dad and I. We're at the game, and there was this buzz going through the garden, and we're looking around, and people are whispering, and we look back right behind us, right at the back end of these courtside seats was where the NBC broadcast table was.
Right,
and I remember very distinctly Bob Costas there, and I don't recall who else was announcing the game with Bob Costas, but just a little bit behind us, we turned around, we saw Costas, and there was just a lot that were looking at each other, they were staring at their TV monitor, and this was during the game time, and they're staring at this monitor, and I guess word filtered down that the OJ car chase was going on. And this was concurrent to the game that we were watching, the Knicks and the Rockets in 1994.
Right.
And I just remember looking back. That's one of those things, you remember where you were when certain historic things took place. And I remember where I was when the OJ car chase took place, because I was at the Knicks game.
Right.
And I remember turning around frequently, starting to become distracted as well from the game. And, looking back and just looking at the body language and the